things are not looking particularly fantastic for the British economy as things stand. Should we see if we can find some stats? So this is a chart of GDP per hour. So productivity, as some of you will know, some of you will not, is broadly a measure of, for each hour that is worked in a given country, region, supranational area, how much economic output is produced. Right, so if we average all the hours that everyone in a country is working, and then we add up all the hours, and then divide the total GDP of that country by the number of hours worked, how productive is the country being? And if we look at this chart here, what you can see is that productivity broadly, for multiple countries, has tailed off a little bit. You can see Italy's has not grown particularly fantastically since about 2000. But you can see some leading countries up here, Germany, America, France, have a pretty good line, which is up and to the right. Which, if you are the kind of person who thinks that this kind of graph is a good way of measuring how the economy works, that is good. What we see in the case of the UK is that until about 2007, about 2008, the UK was matching the productivity growth in America, Germany, France, and then around the time of the financial crisis, maybe just before, there's a little bit of an elbow there, and it began to flatten off a little bit. And how to solve this has been challenging. Another way of seeing how the UK economy is doing is we can look at this comparison between the FTSE 100, which is a group of stocks which are the 100 most valuable British companies listed on the London Stock Exchange, and we can compare that to the S&P 500, which is one of a handful of lists of the most valuable American companies. And what you can see is that between, where did this start? 2000? Between 2000 and up until about 2015, there really isn't a huge amount separating them in terms of their overall movements, right? And then round about 2015, 2016, there's just this massive separation, right? The gulf between them changes massively. And yeah, so some of this, as people are suggesting in the chat, has been a result of 14 years of Conservative government in which initially austerity was kind of the order of the day. That kind of begins to explain some of those productivity differences that we saw in the first graph. Here, yeah, Brexit would seem to be a factor, right? If we are looking at, correlative things that have happened on the markers where some of these things change. Other things are just structural, right? A lot of the tech companies are based in the US, and in an era where tech companies have been the big performers, that has allowed this separation to happen. And in fact, a lot of this last little bit of separation here has been a massive bull run on companies which are invested and researching and pushing forward on AI research and AI, like the monetization thereof, I guess. VividX says we should simply invest the entire UK GDP into the S&P 500, which you say that. That is a very real problem, okay? So over the past, maybe 5 years, there's been a kind of popularization, and this has been a much longer process, but it feels like it has gained real momentum over the past kind of 5 or so years, maybe, of retail investing, right? Which we saw massively in the sort of Wall Street bets era, or kind of the sort of Wall Street bets moment where GameStop had that massive rally, where Bed Bath and Beyond after that had these kind of contrarian Reddit-based investors, and some of that was driven by this kind of activist desire to take on the hedge funds or whatever. But it was also driven by the fact that there have been companies over the past decade at least who have really pushed retail investing in the stock market. So encouraging, quote unquote, ordinary people to go out and buy stocks and shares. The Robin Hoods of this world, not multiple, Robin Hood of this world, which I don't think you can get in the UK, I'm fairly sure, but you can in the US, allows you to invest in individual stocks and shares. Received a lot of criticism for the ways in which the mechanics of the app work like a gambling app, which, isn't particularly great if you are encouraging, in terms of like how you are encouraging people to view their investments and stuff. We've also seen, there's like equivalents elsewhere. So there's like Trading 212 in the UK, which similarly is a app where you can invest your money, and in some ways is like a banking app, right? But in many other ways, gamifies that a little bit. But even outside of these communities and these realms in which investing is viewed as gambling, there's been a big push of kind of passive investing, right? And particularly in index funds. So index funds, so something like the FTSE 100, which I mentioned a moment ago, or the S&P 500. The FTSE 100, S&P 500 are both lists of the most valuable companies in a given country or area. There's all kinds of ways you can do it. You can have, so FTSE 100 is the most valuable companies in the UK, but you might have other lists which are a list of the best tech stocks in the UK or the best manufacturing stocks in the UK. You might have lists of the most valuable stocks that are also stocks of companies that are particularly large. You can sort of divvy it up anyway. But essentially, as well as these just being interesting numbers that you can look at, there are also ways, companies which will offer you the opportunity to invest in a index fund, which is effectively if you put £100 in to this fund, it will divide that £100 up into the relative percentages of the S&P 500 or the relative percentages of the FTSE 100. So if Microsoft makes up 10% of the S&P 500, I don't believe it does, 10% of your £100 will buy Microsoft shares or fractional shares of Microsoft. This is Ace asks a really good question in terms of, are we comparing the same companies over that period on the graph? Has the composition of the 100 and the 500 stayed broadly the same? That does change over time. So, for example, Tesla did get added. Was added to the S&P 500 in 2020. So to finish what I was saying a moment ago, there's been a big rise of this idea of, rather than just saving your money in the bank, or rather than trying to buy individual stocks and shares and like game the market, there's been this real rise and popularization and kind of democratization of the idea of, if you have a spare 100 quid, you should invest it in an index fund of the S&P 500, FTSE 100, whatever. One side note of that is that if you are in that list or if you are not in that list, suddenly makes a big difference. So when Tesla got added to the S&P 500 in 2020. Did this chart? Yeah, 2020. Like, that was a big deal because suddenly all of the index funds, all of the like money that people are holding on to, if you're BlackRock, I can never remember my Blackstone and my BlackRock, but if you're whichever one of those is the investing, if you're Hargreaves Lansdowne, if you're I think I'm just messing up all the names of these. If you're Vanguard, if you're Trading 212, suddenly you sell whatever the company is that's fallen off the S&P 500, and you buy a whole load of Tesla for all of the millions of, or billions maybe, I'm not sure, of index fund that you are holding. So this final little, well, so a lot of this actually, but particularly this bit here over the past couple of years has been like, this is AI here. This is people getting mad excited about AI. If this is what's happening, the FTSE 100 here, S&P 500 here, the UK economy is not doing particularly great. Should we just invest? Like, should the UK just invest a load of money into the S&P 500? One of the challenges that the London Stock Exchange has, that British companies have that are in the FTSE 100, that the government kind of has by proxy, is that people in the UK who are investing in index funds, broadly speaking, aren't choosing to invest in the FTSE 100 because its growth is like not particularly fantastic, whereas the S&P 500 is doing this. In fact, there's like a British ISA, I think. So an ISA in the UK is either cash savings account or stocks and shares tax wrapper, which essentially means you can invest a certain amount or save a certain amount each year without the interest if it's cash, or without the gains if it's stocks and shares being taxable, right? So it sort of means that, I don't know, the idea is that it allows people who have got a certain amount of savings but not a ridiculous amount to be able to invest or save tax-free, but people that, I don't know, have more money than that, they still hopefully do get taxed on it because they are wealthy. But the UK government, this was the Tories before Labour won the last election, they came up with a British ISA, which was effectively designed to try and combat this. And they were like, okay, we will give people special incentives to invest in British companies rather than American ones, because else what's happening is that, you know, people that are working in the UK are earning a bunch of money, and then if they're lucky enough to have extra money sitting around, they're not then investing that in ways that are kind of keeping the British economy sort of ticking over and growing. They're instantly just exporting it to America.